All right, I think we're good to go. Hey everybody, my name is Samuel Chilron, Urban Horticulture Program Specialist at UF IFAS, Miami-Dade County Extension. I work in the Florida Yards and Neighborhoods program, which is a program that teaches homeowners and property managers how to sustainably manage their landscapes. We have a lot of very cool initiatives and programs. I'm going to post a link to our website in the announcements, and I really encourage you guys to go check that out. Right, it's there now. All right, so today we're going to be talking about edible landscaping, and specifically edible landscaping under the framework of Florida friendly. So this is actually a huge topic. We only have an hour today, so I'm going to do the best I can. We're going to be going through a lot of different things. What I ask is that go ahead and ask questions during the presentation, but I'm going to get to them at the very end. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so what is edible landscaping? Basically, the idea is you're swapping your ornamental plants for food-producing plants. There's actually a rich history of edible landscaping in South Florida. A lot of the wealthy founders of Miami had extensive edible gardens, and that continues to this day with all of our diaspora communities. We have a very diverse community who loves to grow a wide variety of edible plants. Edible landscaping has also been one of the fastest growing landscaping trends in the past 10 years. If you have social media, you will definitely see people starting gardens, edible gardens all over the place. And you know, its prevalence is increasing not only as a form of entertainment, but due to concerns of food safety and sustainability. A lot of people are beginning to question, you know, why are there, you know, outbreaks of E. coli in food and whatnot. So that's a motivator for a lot of folks. So why edible landscaping? Obviously, you're going to be saving money. There is some money that you have to spend to get it started, but you get a return on your investment, which leads to reduced food costs. Also for nutrition, food is going to be most nutritious immediately after you harvest it. But also for flavor and variety. There are so many different varieties of fruits and vegetables that you just can't find in the grocery store because they're not well suited to shipping and to storage. But if you grow them yourself, you have them right at your fingertips. Also for convenience and sustainability. So if you're just walking to get your food instead of getting in your car and driving to the grocery store, you're reducing your carbon footprint. And then also for, like we mentioned before, food security. It reduces your dependence on foreign inputs or foreign imports, excuse me. And also it's just a great form of recreation. It's a great great for your mental health. You get to connect with nature, yourself, and also your community. Of course, you know, it's a good outdoor activity. You can definitely practice social distancing while in the garden. We want to encourage everyone to always be safe with that. Please follow guidelines set by the CDC. Nonetheless, though, there's always been some complex reactions to edible landscaping, especially from HOAs and local governments. You know, they get a bad rap for having an untidy look. These photos that I have in the slide, some of these gardens do look a bit untidy, unkept. You know, there's the issue of fruit drop on sidewalks. Mulberries are notorious for this. But then there's also the attraction of nuisance wildlife, so that is a concern for some. Nonetheless, people want to engage in this activity, and so how do we strike a balance between the aesthetic needs, the functional needs of the community at large, and the private need of the individual to enjoy their landscape and grow their own food? So that's where the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program comes in. It was created to educate homeowners and property managers about best landscaping practices to conserve and protect our water resources. So there was a lot of water pollution happening, and still is, unfortunately. This is non-point source pollution, so it can't be pinpointed to any one actor. But what was discovered was that over-irrigation, over-application of fertilizers was leading to a lot of algal bloom outbreaks. And so this was an enormous initiative by various government agencies within Florida and the University of Florida to create best management practices to reduce environmental harm. It's based on the 9 Florida-friendly landscaping principles. There's actually going to be a presentation on this tomorrow. I encourage you guys to check out our Eventbrite page and sign up for that. I won't be going into, I'll be glossing over some of the principles in this presentation, but you'll get a more in-depth treatment in the principles with my colleague, Barbara McAdam, tomorrow if you guys tune in. So I definitely encourage that. You know, FFL from the outset has always understood HOA sensibilities. You know, a lot of the new development in Florida in general is under homeowners associations, and they have guidelines for what a landscape should look like. So Florida Friendly not only takes into account the environment, but also an attractive landscape that's going to be that's going to meet the expectations of a wide variety of folks. Sensitivity toward neighborhood character and property values. These are the kinds of things that we want to be thinking about with our edible gardens too. So we can apply these Florida-friendly best management practices to edible landscapes to widen their appeal. Okay, so scope of this presentation. And again, this is an enormous topic. Each and every point can have its own presentation, but we're going to talk about soil foundations. We'll look at South Florida soils, you know, issues that our soil has and how to overcome them. We're going to talk about key design concepts. Right plant, right place, which is one of the Florida-friendly principles, figures largely into this. We're also going to talk about sustainable maintenance and care, and all of the different practices that you can implement to keep your edible landscape healthy and producing food for you, and to avoid problems. So it all starts with the soil. What is good soil? Good soil is usually, always, it's high in organic matter. It has soil life. There's earthworms in it. There's microorganisms. A teaspoon of soil has over 1 million microorganisms living in it, and they have their own economy. They're breaking down minerals. They're making nutrients available to the plants. A good soil also has a neutral pH, which is in between 6.0 to 7.0. Around this range, plants are best able to absorb the nutrients in the soil. They can actually have access to it, and that's important. I'm going to get into that when we talk about Florida soil. A good soil is also not compacted. It's friable with good tilth. So that means that you can work it with your hands quite easily. It's kind of fluffy in area. It has good air pore space. It drains well. It's not muddy, and it is able to dry out. Although soils high in organic matter do have a tendency to hold moisture better, so they don't dry out all the way. And it smells earthy. You know, some people even describe it as looking good enough to eat. So it's funny. I feel like we have an instinct for what good soil looks like. It does take nature thousands of years to create this, so we want to think about soil building as an act of conservation. Okay, so South Florida soils. They're not that great, actually. Agriculture here has been practiced more due to favorable weather than the quality of the soil. So it's relatively frost-free here, so we can get vegetable crops in the fall and the winter when the rest of the country is putting their vegetable farms to sleep. We have various types of soil here. They all have their advantages, but they all have their own disadvantages as well. So sand it drains really well. You're never going to have an issue with the sand being waterlogged, but it has poor nutrient holding capacity because it has less organic matter. We have muck. That's near the Everglades, south of Lake Okeechobee. This is actually a great agricultural soil, but it does have a tendency to get waterlogged It's prone to flooding, easily compacted. And then in Homestead, South Dade County and the Redlands, there's a very rocky soil and another kind of soil called marl. And agriculture has happened here for a very long time with lots of success. But those soils tend to be shallow, they're hard, and they're hard to work with without machinery. There's more issues too. So South Florida soils also, all of them here, there's an underlying calcareous limestone that causes the soil to be highly alkaline. So when the soil's pH is too high, this can prevent the plant from absorbing some key nutrients. In South Florida, we see a lot of iron, magnesium, zinc, and manganese deficiencies. And farmers have workarounds for that. But this is a big issue with our soil, unfortunately, the high pH. We also have a high occurrence of nematodes, which is a microscopic worm that damages the roots of the plants. In some areas, there's concern of contamination due to human activity, oil spills, or a site that previously had a building. A large variety of things could be wrong with the soil in our urban areas, unfortunately. In South Florida, in order for us to grow edibles successfully, we need to build the soil up, or we need to improve it. For more information on soils, you can check out these UF publications. You'll see on there it says UF EDIS. If you go into Google and type in UF EDIS, it'll take you up to UF's database of articles on a variety of different topics about agriculture, landscaping, and it is just phenomenal. I've personally learned so much from this resource, and I highly, highly recommend it. These two articles are good for learning about soil. There's, they have their little code there, and then the title. I didn't have enough room here to put all the authors, but I highly recommend checking that out. Okay, so we have problematic soils. The answer is raised beds. The basic idea is to create an enclosed structure above the level of the native soil to form a planting bed. That begs the question, well, what do you fill these planting beds with? You want to fill them, or what we recommend they be filled with, is a half and half mixture of garden soil or compost and half potting mix. So these are products that you can get at the home improvement stores. Garden soil and compost are interchangeable. And then the potting mix is just this loose, fluffy growing media that's going to help with the friability and the tilth of the soil that you're going to be creating for your raised bed. Or you can choose any product that has good water holding capacity. It has to have organic matter, and you're looking for something with a light, fluffy texture. If you're going to purchase a bulk product, like maybe from a garden center or a bulk soil supplier, for your raised beds, aim for something that's like potting mix, or order their potting mix product. There's actually a lot of bulk suppliers that make a really nice mix. It's like a combination of Florida peat, which is our muck soil, coarse sand, and then they put pine bark in there as well. Some places also mix in perlite and horse manure. So this is actually a pretty good planting media for the raised beds. So when you build your raised beds too, you might want to line the bottom of the bed with cardboard or landscaping fabric. This helps you to skip the step of moving the weeds or the sod that you're installing a raised bed over. It also can help with preventing competition from adjacent trees and landscaping plants, although eventually, like, an aggressive tree will eventually make its way into your raised bed, so that's something to think about. Raised bed design. Okay, you are not limited to squares and rectangles when it comes to raised beds. You can use curvature. Let the artist in you design something incredible. You can match your raised beds to shapes in the landscape. The main idea, though, is you want to create hard edges on the raised beds, and you want to raise the level of the soil at least 4 to 12 inches. But Also, you want to keep your bed width within 2 to 4 feet. This is going to make it easier for you to work the bed, to harvest from it. Anything wider than 4 feet is a little unmanageable. And then you want to allow at least 2 feet of walking space between the raised beds. This is going to make it easier for you to use your garden. Raised bed materials. So almost anything can be used. Anything that has structural integrity that's not going to fall over with the weight of the soil. So you do want to keep that in mind. You can use what you have on hand. You can purchase items. I love natural materials and recycled materials. You can make raised beds out of bottles, logs, limestone rock, which is really nice because that's what we have indigenous to our area. So you kind of follow a Florida theme if you're using a limestone rock. I'm a big fan of those. But there's also hundreds of kits available for raised beds. Just search online. But again, the overall goal is to create a clean, attractive edge. And what this is going to do is it's going to improve the aesthetic of your edible garden, especially when your plants are beginning to fade. So container gardens are also a really great way to include edibles really fast. They're great for including edibles in non-traditional spaces, decks, patios, balconies. In containers, however, you just want to use potting mix. You don't want to, do that half and half garden soil mix because containers have to drain well. They have to also dry out. So that's very important. So you can use any container as long as it has drainage holes. The larger the container, the bigger the plant that you put in it is going to grow. This is especially important if you want to grow fruit trees in containers. The amount of fruit you're going to be producing is limited by the size of the container. This is true of tomatoes, eggplants, peppers as well. So be mindful of that. It's a quick way to incorporate edible plants in an already established landscape. I love to use containers underneath the shade of trees that are already established, like big shade trees. You can avoid root competition. So one of my favorite things to do actually is to grow ginger and turmeric in pots on the edge of the shade of a large shade tree. They prefer shady conditions, so you can also protect your herbs during the summer underneath the shade of the tree. So pots are a really great workaround, especially when you want to put your edibles in an already established landscape. There's lots of containers available. One of my favorites is the galvanized metal stock containers that's on the bottom left. Those are really great. It's basically like an instant raised bed. There's also grow bags. Grow bags are phenomenal. They're also called jackpots. They have a lot of different trade names, but the basic idea is it's a fabric pot and it's breathable. So the roots of the plant, the idea is that the roots of the plant are less stressed in a breathable, in a container with a breathable wall. Or you can work with the native soil. You don't have to use pots. You don't have to use raised beds. You can work with the native soil. Obviously not all edibles are going to do great in raised beds, especially fruit trees, which can get really large. You want to plant the fruit trees and any perennials that get large directly in the ground. So in spite of our issues with our soil, they can all be improved by adding organic matter, applying mulch, composting and recycling your yard waste. Just layer organic matter on top of the soil. One of my favorite ways of improving the soil over the long term is sheet mulching. This is also called lasagna gardening. And the basic idea is that you're overlapping various layers of carbon material. The key component of that, though, is a layer of cardboard or newspaper that's well overlapped that's going to act as kind of a weed barrier. You're going to definitely want to have compost on hand to build this. You need to first you mow the grass, you put down the cardboard, on top of that you put the compost, and then on top of that you put mulch. And to plant these right after you've installed your sheet mulch, you have to actually cut holes in the cardboard. It's really helpful to wet everything down to make it easier to cut into. And then I do recommend lining your planting hole with either compost or potting mix. That's going to help your plant get better established in a sheet mulch. Okay, so now we're going to talk about different design considerations. One of the most important ones is having the right plant in the right place. Florida friendly principle number one. So plant selection, is a big part of that. Sun exposure and drainage. This is extremely important when talking about edibles. Plant life cycles and aesthetic considerations. So we're going to get into that as well. Different ways to group plants together. There's ways to make it attractive, and also layering your plantings to make the best use of your space with edibles. So first part of that is you have to choose the right edibles for South Florida's climate. We are semi-tropical. We have a pronounced dry season and a wet season. We're actually warm most of the year. We're relatively frost-free. So if you're going to grow temperate vegetables like broccoli, tomatoes, cauliflower, peppers, you want to look for the more heat-tolerant varieties that are also resistant to fungal diseases. When you're looking at seed catalogs or checking out online seed stores, this information is usually there. You also want to think about varieties that come from tropical countries. We want to look to the food plants that are grown in the Caribbean, Africa, Central and South America, Southern China, where lychees are from, Southeast Asia, India. We want to look to these countries. What are they growing there? They have a climate similar to ours. And so the plants from those countries are going to be better adapted to our semi-tropical climate here. But you also want to be mindful of tropical edibles that can have an invasive or weedy tendency. So a good example is ackee, which it has to be processed correctly because it can be toxic, but it's demonstrated weediness, and I've seen birds actually distribute the seeds and ackee trees kind of popping up where no one planted them. So you definitely want to be mindful. There are a couple of edible plants that have invasive tendencies. I really want to encourage everyone to go to UF-IFAS Miami-Dade County's website and check out the fact sheet, Your Edible South Florida Yard. There's a really nice list of different edibles that do great in our climate. I'm actually going to also be doing a presentation on this topic just because it's so huge. I'll be doing a second presentation on this, just kind of going through the different plants that you could use in the edible landscape and what's worked and what I've seen do really bad. Okay, sun exposure and soil drainage. This is very important. Most edible plants are going to require at least 6 hours of full sun for good production. The more sun, the better. You want to be mindful of the shade. Large trees and buildings. You want to site your garden on to the south, to the east, and to the west of these things. In the fall, when a lot of the vegetables that people enjoy growing, such as leafy greens, broccoli, cabbage, that time of year is the best time of year for those edibles in terms of temperature, but it's also the time of year when the sun is lowest in the sky, in the southern horizon. So you want to be thinking about planting things on the southern side of large objects. That's also called southern exposure. But yeah, so site things south of large objects. And the soil for edible plants should have good drainage. So if the only place where you get good sun in your yard is also a place that floods, a workaround is raised beds. You can try raised beds there. That's very helpful. There are some edible plants that actually like flooded conditions. So there's always going to be exceptions. And that's why research is very important. Right plant, right place. Just off the top of my head, a vegetable that would do well in a kind of waterlogged condition is taro, which comes from the Pacific. It's like a potato-like crop, but those do well in waterlogged soil, as well as another one called malanga, which is actually grown here in Miami-Dade County. Okay, so now we're going to get into edible plants and aesthetic considerations. So really, with an edible garden, the biggest challenge is to keep it healthy looking year round. You know, plants have a life cycle. They have a seasonal nature to them. Their appearance changes. So, you know, tomatoes are infamous for this. They look really great and when they're just getting started and when they have their fruits, but then they start to look a little rough. But they're still producing fruit, and you still want to keep them around. But basically, the goal is to design your edible garden in such a way as to hide or make up for the appearance of certain plants when they are not looking their best. So a simple way to do this is for your front yard, like a high visibility area like your front yard, you might want to choose more fruit trees and perennial vegetables that are evergreen, that aren't going to really change their appearance. There's a lot of herbs like this. There's a lot of leafy greens that are like this. Fruit trees are great for the front yard, except for the fact that, you know, people can potentially steal them. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, you want to keep plants that are going to look good throughout the course of the year. You want to keep them more towards the front yard. In the backyard is where you want to include your annuals and perennials that have short lifespans. So ginger and turmeric, you might want to keep them in the backyard because when they're ready to harvest, their tops are going to start dying down. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, you might want to keep them in the backyard because they do kind of enter a stage where they look a little rough, but they're still producing delicious food. So yeah, keep those vegetables in the back. Also, grouping plants together. So another thing you can do to improve the look, if you did want to have annuals in the front yard, is to combine those annuals with reliable, low maintenance evergreens to maintain green structure. Your goal is to when you're swapping out an annual, you want to make that bare spot less noticeable. And again, I'm going to go over different plants that are going to be good for this, for building green structure in a future presentation. It's a lot of perennial herbs and a lot of perennial vegetables, which are quite nice, actually. In addition to that, you want to incorporate visual diversity as much as possible. There are edible plants that are striped or variegated. They have striped or variegated leaves. There's edible plants with colorful stalks. There's unique fruits. You know, the jackfruit pictured above is a classic example of a super unique edible landscaping plant. There's also the jaboticaba, which produces fruits right on its trunk. Highly recommended for edible landscaping. You know, there's lots of eggplants with unique shapes and colors that are just fantastic, very beautiful. And then there's also your higher maintenance edibles. So bananas are a classic example. Sugarcane, ginger, turmeric, cassava. You might want to keep these together so that you can manage them a bit better. One classic way of growing bananas is to do a banana circle. So I have one pictured here in this slide. A banana circle is basically just a pit. In the sense, you dig a pit where you put your compost in and your yard waste, and then you grow bananas around that. So the nice thing about that is bananas have to be pruned. You have to cut back the pseudostems after they've produced fruit. A banana circle gives you a convenient place to put that yard waste after you've cut it off the plant. The same is true for sugarcane. You know, sugarcane should be grown all together if you're going to grow sugarcane. Okay, so to take best advantage of your vertical space, you want to layer your plantings. And the idea is very similar to traditional landscapes. Basically, you want your taller plants in the background, smaller plants in the foreground. A really popular idea nowadays is food forests, and there's a lot of talk about the layers of a food forest. A root layer, an herb layer, a shrub layer, a vine layer, mid canopy layer, canopy layer. I'll go more into detail about different plants that can be used in these layers in a future presentation, but I highly recommend doing some research on food forests. It's a really neat idea, but they have to be designed right or else they become a little bit of a headache. So, part of that is allowing for proper spacing when you're planting these edibles. You want to minimize the competition for light between them. So, research these plants, research their growth habit, how wide they get, research how productive they remain if you were to prune them to keep them to a certain size. You can always use grafted material, grafted fruit trees, or you can keep them smaller and they still produce an abundance of fruit. But this is really important. You don't want to plant things too close together. That can lead to a lot of problems. That can lead to certain plants becoming weakened by others, and then when a hurricane comes by, you have an enormous mess. You want plants to grow. You want plants to have enough sunlight to fuel their growth and to become well established. So be mindful of spacing, but also plants, certain plants fit together well and can be close to spacer. So that's another thing that you want to pay attention to. And research is going to kind of bring that information to the forefront. If you're working with deep shade, you might want to use some shade tolerant ground cover. So if you already have a lot of established fruit trees, you can, again, I mentioned it before, but you might want to use containers underneath those fruit trees to grow edibles. I also just like incorporating ground covers underneath fruit trees that you can plant directly in the soil. Comfrey is a really good one. Perennial peanut is one if you have a little bit of sun underneath the canopy as well. Okay, so continuing on this theme of just improving the visuals of the edible garden, trellises and support structures are a great way to do this. And actually, many of the highest quality edibles that we can grow here require a trellis for the best growth. Well-built structures with architectural details can provide visual appeal in place of plants during their dormancy period. That's another important thing to consider. Pergolas and archways, they make great garden entrances and great hangout spots in the garden. We have so many vining vegetables and fruits. Highly recommend doing a trellis or a support structure to accentuate them. All right, and then there's pathways. So pathways are in a traditional landscape, you don't typically see pathways into the planting bed, but with edible landscapes, we need those pathways. They're going to create spatial organization, and they're going to allow you to have access to the plants for harvesting and maintenance. Use materials that are going to give a clean edge. These are going to be the most attractive. So you can use brick pavers, stepping stones, gravel, mulch, pine bark nuggets, anything that's going to give some contrast is going to make the garden look a lot better. And reliable arrangements of the pathways. It can be tricky to figure out how to put a pathway into maybe an already established edible landscape. But I really like series of parallel pathways. You can do perpendicular plant beds. Keyhole beds are a really interesting concept. I encourage you guys to look into those as a way to save space. All right, and then there's also irrigating your edible garden, which it can be tricky. We have a pronounced dry season here, so during that time, it usually starts around March. During that time, you're going to want to make sure that your garden is getting water. So lawn rotors and sprays. For an edible garden, they can be problematic and insufficient. They can overwater an edible garden and sometimes cause fungal problems. So I recommend drip irrigation for an edible garden. And micro sprinklers, that's called micro irrigation. So in your beds, like maybe for your fruit trees and your food forests, you want to use 1/2 inch inline drip irrigation tubing. You arrange it in parallel lines. You can also do it in a circle around a fruit tree. So that would be for the fruit trees and the large perennials. For leafy green crops, you want to use micro sprayers or micro sprinklers on stakes. These are also really good if you do direct seeding in the ground. You can plant the seeds directly into the ground, and a micro sprinkler is going to help them to germinate. For crops like squash, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, you want to use drip irrigation. They do not like their leaves to get wet from sprinklers or micro sprinklers or rotors or shrub sprays or anything like that. And you want to try to group these plants according to their needs into hydrozones. So that's also a concept in landscape irrigation as well. So for example, you don't want to plant a water-loving vegetable like broccoli next to a vegetable that doesn't need as much water, like peppers. You want to make sure that you're not overwatering a crop because one crop has different water needs. And I heavily encourage the use of rain barrels. You can site a rain barrel near your garden. There is concern over chemicals on the roof washing into the water, so you might want to, that might be an important consideration. But rain barrels, it's pH neutral water. It's very, very good for plants. Okay, if you're going to do micro irrigation, you need to install a backflow preventer, a filter, and a pressure regulator at the water source. So those are pictured above there. There's a timer, and then there's the filter, the pressure regulator, and the different fittings that help to hook it up to polytubing. It is a little, there is a little bit of a learning curve with this. If you already have a landscape irrigation system in place, there's actually adapters that you can buy to retrofit your system to have drip irrigation for your edibles, or micro sprinklers for your edibles. It's also good to have a timer or an irrigation controller so you can automate your system. This in of itself could be an entire presentation, so I want to encourage folks to check out these UF EDIS publications. There's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of great information on UF EDIS. You can just do a quick Google search and it'll pop up. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into irrigation. But again, micro irrigation is going to be your best bet for the edible landscape. Okay, and in terms of maintaining your edible landscape, mulch. Mulch is key. You want to strive to maintain a 3 to 4 inch layer of mulch over the surface of the soil at all times. So for annual vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, leafy greens, arugula, you want to use a fast decomposing mulch like straw, fresh leaf clippings. These are the best for annual vegetables because they're not going to, a more woodier mulch has a tendency to take nitrogen out of the soil and make it less available to the plants, which is something that you don't want for those annuals. Wood chips, the slow decomposing wood chips, you want to use those for your fruit trees and for your perennial vegetables. You can actually get arborist wood chips delivered right to your door. There's a really cool website called chipdrop.com, and you can sign up your property, and it allows arborists to know that your property is available for dropping wood chips. These are a great material for building soil and for mulching your edibles, especially your fruit trees. And in general, you just want to be practicing soil building in your edible garden every year. You want to recycle your yard waste. You do want to compost. You know, you can integrate your compost piles within plantings. You can see the image at the top. There's like this garbage can looking thing. This is one of my favorite composting units. You basically you layer your green and brown materials in there and just allow it to sit, let nature do its thing, and digest it into a a rich, dark humus, you can just put those right into the edible landscape and hide them with edibles. One of my favorite things to do is a banana circle, which I mentioned earlier, which is basically a compost pile that's surrounded by banana plants. You also want to think about interplanting soil building green manure plants. So another name for those are cover crops. Dynamic nutrient accumulators are other plants that are able to mine minerals from lower layers of the soil. There's a lot of these. In South Florida, my favorites are comfrey, pigeon peas, moringa, sun hemp. You can include these interspersed within your edible garden and chop them and use them as mulch around your other plants. You could have a hedge of soil building plants, and you can use those hedge trimmings as mulch. Moringa is a really good one for that. Again, I want to encourage everyone to check out these publications: Compost Tips for the Home Gardener, Cover Crop Benefits for South Florida, and Commercial Vegetable Producers. There's a lot of good stuff on UF's EDIS website. All right, so that also begs the question of fertilization and nutrients. With mulch and soil building practices, most edible plants aren't going to require a heavy use of fertilizer, or at least for the kind of production that you're going to expect at the home scale. If you are going to use fertilizers, you want to use slow release inorganic formulations. So those are things like Osmocote, which isn't organic, but it's a great fertilizer. They usually last 3 to 6 months, and every time it rains or every time there's a watering event, it slowly releases fertilizer to the plants. I prefer using organic fertilizers and amendments. There's a lot on the market. Commercially, you can get ones that are based off of dehydrated turkey or poultry manure. And again, like when you're using fertilizers, you really want to apply them according to the instruction on the label. You can also apply compost as fertilizer, or worm castings. Worm castings are a special kind of compost that's created by composting worms. That's the best compost you can get, to be honest. Start a worm bin, grow your own fertilizer. Every time you're planting, you can include some of those worm castings in the planting hole. And you can use it to make compost tea. Compost tea is a great liquid fertilizer for your edibles. You can see there's more information on the different organic amendments that you can use for your edible garden in this publication, Organic Vegetable Gardening in Florida. They do a really good job outlining all the things that are available. Okay, so maintenance and pruning. This could be an entire presentation on its own. But periodically, you're going to want to tame the plants. You're going to want to trim them back. Trimming them back might also mean harvesting them too, which is one of the neat things about that edible landscape. You definitely want to deadhead perennial flowers and remove old and dying plant foliage. This is going to help with airflow and help the plants remain healthy. For some annuals, it's going to increase their lifespan, so you can get more of a harvest off of them. Flowers, when a plant flowers, it's at the end of its life, and it's signaling to itself, I'm gonna make seeds. And this is it, But if you cut those flowers back, you may be able to get the plant to live a bit longer. When you are pruning plants, especially fruit trees, you don't want to remove more than 30% of the total leaf area at any one time. Remember, this is how they feed themselves, photosynthesis. So we want them to still be able to photosynthesize. With fruit trees, and again, this is a huge topic. This could be a whole presentation, but you can keep them short. You want to annually remove upright branches on the fruit trees. This is also going to allow for easier harvest. And again, always research the plant that you want to grow to know more about its growth habit. UF EDIS is a great resource for this. There are articles there on individual edible plants, such as growing avocado, and there's information on how to prune the avocado there. So I definitely recommend checking that out. And whenever possible, like anything that isn't too bulky, use it as mulch in the garden. Anything that you trim, recycle that organic material. That's what's going to make your garden sustainable. Okay, so then there's also the question of pests and problems in the garden. Really, the prevention is the best thing. You want to use the right plants in the right place. You want to select plants that are going to do well here, that are well adapted to our climate. You want to avoid monoculture, so that's just planting one kind of thing over a large area. You want to aim for diversity. Interplant your herbs, your flowers, your edibles. Mix it up, and that's going to make the garden more colorful as well. Another thing you can do is include plants with extra floral nectaries that attract beneficial predator insects. There are actually some native plants that do that. So at the end of the presentation in the bibliography, there's an article that I put out by UF on plants that actually have these. So there are plants that you can bring just to support the ecology of your garden. And you also want to practice crop rotation, which again is a big topic. I can't get into the specifics here, but there is an EDIS publication on that. Okay, so continuing on this topic of integrated pest management, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You want to start with healthy transplants. You want to invest in your soil. Make sure that it's something good to work with. If there's any plants that's just not working out, they're starting to die, pull them out, and just restart. It can be heartbreaking sometimes, but sometimes it's just the best thing to do before a pest issue or a disease issue gets worse and is transmitted to other plants. When you're going to use insecticides and fungicides, go for the natural products. You'll see on products that'll say OMRI listed. That means that it's approved for organic gardening or organic farming. These things are safer to use. And again, there's lots of excellent UF EDIS publications on this. I highly encourage you guys to check these out. All right, so frontiers and future directions. So again, this is like a huge emerging field, and I have a feeling that I think if it doesn't already exist, there's probably going to be a social media platform that that helps home growers trade or sell their excess produce. There's something you can go invent. Home-based nurseries for trade in rare edibles. Unfortunately, a lot of edible plants are hard to find. But as they become more widely distributed, we can see more folks propagating those and making them available to other gardeners. It's already happening. There are actually already professional edible landscaping, design, installation, and maintenance businesses. A Google search will quickly turn up like 2 or 3 here in South Florida. They're all great. I don't endorse any one of them, but if you're looking for someone to do the heavy work for you, there's folks already out there doing this. And then, maybe one day we'll see the integration of home gardens into the commercial food system, although that would be a very tricky thing, as food is heavily regulated. All right, so some recommended reading. This is my bookshelf. You guys can take a look at these books. These are great just for the beginner. Florida's, and to have a reference, a library for your edible landscape, but Florida's Best Fruiting Plants, Florida's Best Herbs and Spices. These are 2 books by Charles Bonning. Perennial Vegetables, Eric Tonesmayer's book. Excellent, absolutely excellent. Organic Methods for Vegetable Gardening in Florida. This was actually published by the University of Florida. Excellent text, Vegetable Gardening in Florida, a classic. And then Designing and Maintaining Your Edible Landscape Naturally, which is geared more towards temperate climates, but it's also great for us here too. And then there's the UF EDIS resources. Here are some online resources. You know, highly encourage everybody to check out our website, UF-IFAS Miami-Dade County. In the publications tab, there is a lot of really good stuff there. UF-IFAS Gardening Solutions. Echo has a lot of really great articles, agroforestry.net, Grow Florida Edibles, Useful Tropical Plants. This is like a database of different edible plants. Fairchild Tropical Botanical Garden also has a lot of really great articles. All right, guys, so that's the end of the presentation. I'm going to take a look at our questions here. Let's see. Okay, so recommended tropical greens and other veggies for a warmer Miami. Okay, so I'll be covering this in a future presentation. Definitely, Miami's getting warmer. We can grow breadfruit here now, which is an ultra tropical, but people are growing and fruiting breadfruit, which is really crazy. Okay, banana trees in the front yard. To produce some privacy and shade to the front of the property, you can grow banana trees in the front yard. You're just going to want to stay on top of pruning them and making sure they look nice. You know, you would go out with a pair of scissors and cut the dead leaves off. Really, that depends on your neighbors too. But yeah, you can plant anything anywhere, but I do usually recommend bananas in the back of the yard just in case it gets out of hand or you forget to prune them or whatnot. Let me see. All right. So does Miami-Dade County have a program to recycle yard waste? And then it could be a source of mulch and for soil building. That's a great question. I believe at the moment there is not actually a place where folks can pick up mulch or compost. I know that they do that in other counties, but that would definitely be something to request of your county commissioners to make that happen, because that is an incredible resource. Let's see. Chip drop is free. Chip drop is free, but they can show up at any moment. So that's something to think about. Somebody asked, do you recommend using AC condensate to irrigate? I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. I would not use it just out of fear of maybe there being something in there, but that could be an interesting thing to research. Okay. All right. What would you suggest as first steps to create an edible garden from scratch? Okay. Okay, so I think a great way to get started is container gardening, just to see if you enjoy it and if you have time for edible gardening. And then from there, you can move on up to raised beds. And from raised beds, you can move on up to fruit trees and grouping everything together in planting beds. And if you really just wanted to do it on the cheap, get one of these chip drop mulch drop-offs and start forming planting beds with it. Just make a really deep layer of mulch, and in 8 months it's gonna compress and you're gonna have a really nice layer of black humus there to work with. What plants would you suggest for an area along the side of a house that is shaded for most of the day? Okay, so in areas that have a lot of shade, you can still grow a good amount of leafy greens, especially kale, arugula, mustard. You could grow green beans there. You could do these in raised beds or in pots if you want. They're going to do better in those conditions. There's a perennial vegetable that grows well in the shade called katuk. You eat the leaves, they taste like peas. It's a really interesting one. So yeah, shady areas can be tough. In the summertime, you could grow ginger and turmeric in pots in that shady side of your house, and they'll probably do pretty well. All right. Okay, yeah. Somebody asked, is there a good book, just on edible landscaping for South Florida? Not yet. Not there. There's no book that's specifically South Florida based. Someone's got to write that. I just use a combination of different references at the moment. But yeah, having it all in one place would be really nice. All right, so plants for very sunny areas. If you have a very sunny area, that's great. That's a great place to put your vegetable garden. And in that vegetable garden, from October to right around now, you would be growing your classic vegetables. But then as we get into late spring and summer, and it's super sunny and super hot, you would be swapping those out for more tropical vegetables like cassava, sweet potatoes, and those can actually tolerate the intense sun of South Florida summer. Okay. Rain barrels are not allowed in some cities. Is that still true? It might be. I highly recommend tuning into tomorrow's presentation with my colleague Barbara McAdam. She'll definitely be able to answer that question, but I don't know, to be honest. So for what do I recommend for apartment dwellers? Okay, so if you are an apartment dweller and you have a balcony that does get good sun, a container garden is great, and you can grow your salad greens in that container garden. It's going to be more difficult to grow tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants unless your balcony is really, really sunny. But you can still grow greens to enjoy in your salads, and even radishes and turnips. Those are really fun. Let's see. What is available and affordable in terms of soil? Okay, this is a tough one. So there is not. You can buy the ingredients to make a good soil mix, but a good bulk soil isn't available currently. Just that you can buy and plant it and it's going to be great. That's something that a local business needs to jump on. You always have to really build the soil and fertilize it with those organic amendments. All right. Okay, here's a good question. How do you know when to move a plant or a transplant into the ground? You want to do it before the plant starts to get root bound in its pot. If the plant is staying too long in its pot, its roots are going to become constricted, and then when you put it in the garden, it's not going to grow as well. Those roots are never going to spread out into the surrounding soil. So you really want to do it before the root ball in the pot starts to circle the bottom of the pot. Okay. Is there a way to prevent papaya fruit flies? I've heard of bagging the fruit flies, bagging the papayas. It is a difficult issue to deal with. You might also want to do applications of neem oil. All right, somebody posted here about melon plant leaves looking really rough. So melons, cucumbers, squash, pumpkins, calabaza, these are all in a plant family called the cucurbit family, and they deal with a lot of issues. They deal with a lot of issues with caterpillars. A good way to combat the caterpillars is an organic insecticide called BT. It's all one of its trade names is Thuricide. That's actually really good for dealing with caterpillars. There's a lot of great questions here about companion planting. There's actually there's not a lot of research on the benefits of companion planting, but anecdotally, a lot of folks recommend it. I think that any chart that you find from a reputable resource, maybe the Rodale Institute, would be a good one to use, even if you're gardening here in South Florida, which is very different than the rest of the country. Okay, one thing I want to address is also iguanas and rats and different pests. If you live close to a body of water, there may be iguanas near your garden, and which can wreak havoc. They eat everything. My recommendation for iguanas is to try to do a container garden. You need to put your edibles out of reach of the iguanas. Also, those galvanized metal stalk containers are really good for preventing iguanas. The sides of them are very slick, so iguanas can't climb up them. So that could be another potential solution if you have iguana issues. And you can get those metal stock containers at any store that sells products for people with horses. Yes, so how to prevent animals such as cats and foxes from damaging plants. You can make little makeshift fences. There's also electric, if you have a large property, there's also electric fencing, which is powered by solar panels. There's little kits that you can buy with that, and that'll keep cats, dogs, and a lot of different kinds of wildlife out of the garden. All right, suggestions for a salad garden. That's a good question. I think plants that are great for a salad garden, kale, arugula. You can grow lettuce. Lettuce is a little bit harder to grow here, but you can grow lettuce, especially when the weather is a lot cooler. Cherry tomatoes are great for a salad garden. Garlic chives. Garlic chives is actually a perennial herb in the onion family. They're great in salads. Let's see, turnips, radishes, a lot of them only take 30 days to produce, so turnips and radishes are also phenomenal for a salad garden. Okay, potatoes, sweet potatoes, where should they be planted? Okay, so the standard potato, the Irish potato, we can grow those here, and you're going to treat those more like you would treat peppers or eggplants or tomatoes. They're not really a sprawling kind of vegetable. They kind of just stay in one place. You have to hill them, so it is a good idea to plant them in their own little spot in your edible garden and to give them ample room. I've seen people growing them in barrels where they start the barrel off, where they'll have the soil in the barrel at one level, and then as the potato plant is growing up, they'll put in more soil as a way of hilling it. Sweet potatoes are different. They actually will cover a large area, so be mindful of where you're planting those. But sweet potatoes do really well here. You can plant them any time of year. And you can also eat their greens. All right, there's a question here about a light meter. So those light meters are really interesting. I've always found like the best tool is just to pay attention to the light patterns throughout the year, because they're going to change, which is another reason container gardening is attractive, because you can move your plants as the light patterns in your yard change. But the light meters, I don't have too much experience working with them. They might be useful. but they're only going to tell you how much sunlight is occurring in a spot at a certain time. Okay, somebody's posted here about Amerigrow having a good soil. Yeah, I can't endorse anybody, but I have heard of people using that and getting good results with it. Okay, there's a question about price of the potting soils. So there's all different kinds of potting soil. The more expensive ones tend to have more worm castings in them, higher amount of organic amendments. But the truth is, no matter what kind of potting mix you buy, it's eventually going to run out of nutrients, just by virtue of the plant consuming them from the soil, and also every time you're watering, a little bit of those nutrients do get flushed out. So after your first crop in your potting soil, you do have to recharge it with fertilizer. Usually when I'm working with an artificial soil mix in a raised bed or in a container, I do fertilize it before I plant. And then I'll re-fertilize either with homemade compost or store-bought organic amendment. You do have to recharge the soil. And you can also use mulch in your raised beds, and you can use mulch in your containers. You don't want it to be too deep, and you don't want it to be up against the stems and trunks of your plants. But it'll go a long way towards preventing nutrients from washing out too quickly. So somebody asked here, what fruit trees do you recommend starting with? It depends on what you like. If you like avocados, get an avocado tree. If you like mangoes, get a mango tree. Both of those grow really well here. When I'm thinking about an edible landscape, I'm thinking about what can I grow that nobody else is growing. To me, that's things like jackfruit, jaboticaba, canistel, garcinias, Pakistani mulberries that are this long. If you have a neighbor who already has a mango tree that's really good, see what you can grow that's different from that, and then you guys can trade. So it's an interesting question, what fruit trees to start with. The easiest ones to grow are definitely avocados and mangoes. Longans are really easy to grow as well. Lychees are delicious, but they have a tendency to fruit. They're tending to fruit less and less as our climate is getting warmer, unfortunately. They require a little bit of chill, wind chill or chill hours, and we're getting less and less of that each year. So lychee production is moving more northward, but longans still are pretty reliable. Okay, here's a good question about someone has some lettuce transplants that are ready to go, and they're asking, they're probably asking this question because they know it's starting to get really sunny and really hot, and they know that lettuce doesn't grow well in that condition, but they still want to grow it. So even though lettuce prefers lower temperatures, if you put it in the shade, it's going to get less sunlight, which means that it's going to have less ability to photosynthesize, and it's going to produce less. So even shade isn't a workaround for growing plants out of season, unfortunately. My recommendation would be to maybe try to grow that lettuce as like a houseplant in your air-conditioned home in a nice sunny windowsill. That could be worth a try. Live oak leaves make great mulch. Someone posted here about avocado trees and A and B types. Yes, you do need A and B types. It's differences in the flowers, although I'm not a tropical fruit specialist. I love tropical fruit. I'm not a tropical fruit specialist. But usually you don't have to worry about that when you're planting an avocado tree at home. Your neighbors, you're bound to have a neighbor who actually has an avocado tree. So that AB flower type, that requirement is going to be met by an avocado tree that's distant from your landscape that a neighbor might have. All right, it's 11:10. Thank you everybody for attending this talk, and stay tuned. I'll be doing another presentation specifically on the plants that are good for edible landscaping here in South Florida. This was just a general overview of principles to follow. And be sure to tune in on Saturday for Barbara McAdams' presentation on the 9 Florida-friendly landscaping principles. All right, happy gardening, everybody, and have a great weekend.